Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, where we take an in-depth look at how news from Taiwan is impacting the world. I'm James Chater. With Chinese intimidation of Taiwan increasing, the government here has pledged to do more to defend itself. Most recently, it's conducted war games simulating a Chinese blockade of the country. But beyond that, it's acquired new rocket launchers, trained its first batch of female reservists, and extended mandatory military conscription. But beyond its military defences, how prepared are ordinary Taiwanese people for the prospect of war? To find out, we're joined by Wen Liu in Taipei. Wen is an assistant research professor at the Institute of Ethnology at Academia Sinica. Welcome to the programme, Wen.
Thanks for having me, James.
Wen, to begin, I want to zoom in on how is civil society preparing for war?
I would say that the overall alertness within the civilian population has really radically increased since the Ukraine war in 2022. So a lot of people are joining grassroots civil defense classes. So people are taking classes on emergency medical training. They're prepping their go bags. They're also taking classes on general knowledge about the military and warfare. So to get a sort of more modernized ideas about how war looks like in today's time.
And how are Taiwanese people dealing psychologically with this type of threat? Because it's something that often gets talked about in the international media, that tensions are just always rising in Taiwan. And what kind of psychological impact do you think that has for everyday Taiwanese people?
I just think that, because the threat has been there for 70 years now, people are kind of desensitized about Chinese threats. But obviously, recently the threats level really increased tremendously. So you have people who are more hyper alert, that they wanted to get some useful and practical skills themselves, because they think in a way that they can't rely on the government, because changes are usually pretty slow from the government.
And can you talk a little bit, you mentioned some of those NGOs a little bit before. What other types of things that people are preparing for, and what do these activities look like? When do they take place? What type of people are attending them?
Yeah, so I look at all the different civil defense organizations. I kind of group them in three different categories. So one, you have those who really are concerned about the China factor. So these groups are sort of continuations of social movements from the anti-media monopoly movement in 2012, and then the Sunflower movement, and later 2018, when disinformation campaign that influenced our election become, sort of more hyper-aware from the public. On the other hand, you also have the more sort of human security and disaster prevention group. So these groups that won't only stress on warfare as the only type of disaster, they often would teach the civilians that even if Taiwan doesn't have a threat from China, we still have earthquake, we have different kinds of natural disaster that require the civilians to know, right, how to protect yourself and your family. And there's a third group, which is quite interesting. These are people who are invested in different kinds of special skills, such as airsoft gun training or handheld radio operation. So these groups have also been in Taiwan for a long time. But because of the threat level from China increase, they started to sort of incorporating warfare in their practice kind of scenario.
And obviously so much attention has been paid to the increase in this type of activity since Russia invaded Ukraine, and the parallels that have been drawn between those two kind of scenarios. But could you talk a little bit about the more historical precedents to these types of organizations, and maybe their relationship to Taiwan's process of democratization and kind of Taiwan's democratic history as well?
Yeah, this is a really complicated issue, because the military in Taiwan was originally KMT's party military, right? It's through decades of effort of nationalization, it becomes sort of ROC government's military. And we often, particularly my generation, will probably associate the military with authoritarianism, right? Or if people still remember the 2013 Hong Zhongqiu, right? A young conscripted officer who was abused and then died, and then the military tried to cover his death. So there was a movement inspired by his death. So we sort of, associate the military with a lot of sort of the conservative baggage and authoritarian history in Taiwan. But I think something is slowly changing, particularly under Tsai's administration, because she has instituted a series of military reform, right? So for instance, the lengthening of the conscript services, right, from 4 months to 1 year, and also different ways of trying to modernize the military, including, having more sort of gender diversity, right, understanding, new types of modern warfare, that type of thing, I think has, increased the confidence level from the Taiwanese public, to the military.
I want to come back and talk about that concept of the public's distrust of the military in a second, but just kind of on those NGOs and their kind of more recent engagement, are you seeing now participation in these activities across the political spectrum in a way that perhaps might not have existed previously?
Right, this is also a complicated issue because I think the more active participants of these organizations are definitely very pro-Taiwan, generally pan-green. But when you go to different types of NGO, particularly the more human security center or disaster prevention center, you have a lot of folks who are not particularly invested in politics, or people who might think of themselves as independent voters, but wanted to have some kind of practical skills so they can protect themselves and their family. And you also actually get people who have, who are military retiree, who are, in the more sort of special skill group, that they wanted to contribute their skills to the overall Taiwan's defense. So in a way, I would say probably 70% of participants are generally pan-green, but you also get a mix of different kinds of, political ideologies as well.
And so just to clarify, pan-green is a kind of political parties that are broadly supportive of the ruling party at the moment, the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP. Just on that and the current participation, we talked a little bit there about kind of political participation. Are we seeing any interesting trends about the kind of age of people that are taking part in this? Are there very old people taking part in these kind of military or like the civil defense preparation exercises too?
Yeah, you'll be surprised. I would say the age is ranging from people who are 18 to like 65. So you get people who are, retired officers or even professors, lawyers who have been out of the reserve sector for a long time, but wanted to kind of train themselves with, different kind of knowledge. And you also get, a variety of, different, very sort of wide gender diversity. And particularly a lot of young mothers are getting involved in this organization because they do concerned about, their children and how to care for their family.
Thank you for that, Wen. Now we're going to take a look at a report from TaiwanPlus reporter Bing Wang, who recently attended the Min An drills, which are civil defense drills here in Taipei.
Explosions and air sirens go off in Taipei as smoke billows under the landmark Taipei 101 building in the Taiwanese capital. All this during the annual Min An civil defense exercises when the city tests its emergency preparedness with an emphasis on wartime efforts.
其实从乌俄战争，我们大家看到国际以及区域的情势多变，所以我们必须要做好相关的准备。那就像我前面所说，我们追求和平，大家也在这一次演习体认到和平的重要性，但我们绝不畏战，我们做好万全的准备。
Thousands of civilians participated in the day-to-day drills, along with dozens of firefighters. And for the first time, there were foreign observers watching the exercises from the sidelines.
That was Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus News. You can see the full report on our website. When to Taiwanese people and to international observers, it seems like these types of drills are happening with greater and greater frequency. Is that necessarily the case, or were these drills kind of in existence before and just more attention is being paid to them?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. So these are routine practices of local governments, right? And in a way, they're more about the intra-governmental coordination of different bureaus and, to checking down, the local government's ability to respond in times of emergency. So this year, they, increase the scenarios as related to warfare, right? Because I think for a long time, that wasn't the sort of prioritized scenario. So in a way, I think because of the global attention on Taiwan and cross-strait tension, but also the public's sort of general level of alertness has increased, the government has to do something, right, to show that they do care about a wartime emergency.
And you mentioned previously again that there's this kind of element of distrust that the Taiwanese public has of the military, given the kind of authoritarian legacy. How has the kind of current administration, I guess, or previous kind of KMT administration since democratization sought to overcome that kind of barrier, I guess?
Yeah, I think you get really different results from different party leaders. So under Ma Ying-jeou's period, he was very interested in demilitarize Taiwan by shortening the service, decreasing the budget of the military. But in a way, I think that kind of gesture, did not really increase Taiwanese society's understanding of the military. On the contrary, it sort of makes Taiwanese people think that military is an unimportant part of Taiwan, right? So that we shouldn't care about it. But in the current administration, I think also because the geopolitical situations are different, there's, I think, much more national attention to military capacity. And we realize that if we don't prepare now, we might be out of time. So I think because of the overall sort of public's concern, it becomes a positive force for the government to actually do something to change our military.
And do you think in that sense that these civil defense groups are in a way kind of filling the gap, kind of psychologically, I guess, that might have otherwise previously been filled by the military? Is that something that's kind of allowing Taiwanese people to feel more secure in their future in that sense?
I think it really depends on, what's your view on cross-strait relations and your view on the war. So, for instance, a lot of people would think this is the military's job, right? The civilians should not over-prepare, should not care about it. And actually, I think, the opinion from the Ministry of Defense, they tend to have this attitude, right? We should put all this effort just into the military, and the civilians should just do their own business. But I think that's no longer enough, because we know the modern type of warfare. It's not just about traditional kind of battle, right? The battlefield is also in civil society. If we think about the types of organized disinformation attacks, the Taiwan has experienced ever since, I would say, 2016. So we really need to sort of expand our way of categorizing what counts as attack or what counts as warfare. And we also need to let the civilians know that they have a role in case of actual emergency, right? So I do think the sort of grassroots NGOs' effort is to try to bridge the gap between the military and civil society. And actually, from my interviews with most of the organizational leaders, they would really love to see that one day that their training forces can, coordinate with the government, right, to increase the capacity of civilian education.
And then just a final question. On the whole, how do you think these new types of civil defense organizations, these new types of activities are changing Taiwanese people's attitudes towards the prospect of war?
Yeah, I do think a healthy level of alertness is definitely better than denial, right? When international media has talked about Taiwan for 2-3 years now in terms of cross-strait tension, we definitely don't want Taiwan to be only labeled in that way. But I think in a way it's also pushing Taiwanese society to think about, is the threat level really the same as 30 years, right? Is it really something changing with all the intensified sort of military drills from China? So I do think that these NGOs can increase not just alertness, but people's framework of how to think about it, right? If you're telling people that there is a threat, but you don't give them any type of training or knowledge, they're just going to be panicked, right? But if you let the civilians know that, okay, there's an actual threat, but there are a lot of things that you can prepare in times of emergency, then I do think it's about increasing community resilience in Taiwan, and it will be better in the long term overall.
Wen, thank you very much for your answers today. It's been a really great conversation. And thank you to our viewers too. This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. You can find TaiwanPlus on Twitter and Facebook. We'll see you next time.